So let me hand over to you, Sam. You're going to go through the presentation. We're going to talk about those big secrets that have been keeping you up at night, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A at the end.
Great stuff. Well, first, let me say, Emmy, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. What I'm going to do to start is share my slides, because last time I did a webinar, I got about 10 minutes in and everybody went, "You're not sharing slides yet," which is remiss. So let me share that right now. I'm going to bring to the front, actually, one of my secrets, which is towards the end. But the reason for mentioning now, you mentioned your £400,000 that you in tax. That's you paid CGT, I assume, on an exit of your business. Well, I actually invested. I'm an exited founder by way of intro. I grew a business. I started an IT business in 2013, grew it to 30 million in 4 years, and then exited. And I didn't pay a penny in tax. I didn't pay a penny in CGT because we invested in our own business via SEIS. And there is a secret. The rules have changed a bit. It's not quite as easy as when I started our business, but there is still a way to incorporate in a way that gives you subscriber shares that are eligible for SEIS as well. So that is one of the secrets brought to the front. So yeah, it's absolutely delighted to be here. This is the first event with Emmy and the Female Founders Rise team, so hopefully it goes well. As I mentioned, I'm an exited founder myself, and when I exited in 2017, I started angel investing. I got 32 investments now, about $750,000 across those. I'm absolutely sector agnostic, so I'll invest in anything. I seem to have quite a few AI investments before AI was on trend, so that is pretty lucky. But I've got, my first investment was in a business that makes the most comfortable male underpants ever. And that for me was all about meeting an amazing founder who I really bought into. In terms of what we're going to cover today, I'll quickly rattle through the agenda. So first, what I thought I'd do is tell you a little bit about what FounderCatalyst does. We'll then walk into kind of an overview of the funding options in the UK to understand where SEIS and EIS fit into that journey and what different options you've got as a founder. We'll talk about debt there. We'll talk about non-SEIS eligible investors as well, but the rest of the presentation after that will be focusing on the exciting tax scheme, SEIS and EIS. And we'll cover the benefits for founders, the benefits for investors, what the process is, what advance assurance is, what you do post-investment, and everything else in between. I talk a lot, so hopefully Emmy is going to jump in with some questions from the audience along the way. Give me 2 seconds to catch my breath. And then finally at the end, we've got a few secrets. I've already told you one, but there are a few others that I'll bring to life, and then Q&A, where Philip will be helping out as well. So looking forward to that. Good stuff. So in terms of what FounderCatalyst does, I started FounderCatalyst because when I started investing, I bumped into lots of founders who had really great ideas, but just had no idea how to do a funding round. It was kind of the old unknown unknowns. And actually, equity fundraising and fundraising in general is a massive topic. There's lots to learn about. There's lots of nuances and complications and risks. But actually, in the UK, if you're fundraising under SEIS and EIS, then the process is really quite straightforward. The rules under SEIS and EIS mandate lots of things about your investors, your company, your share classes, and everything else in between. So doing a funding round in the UK is very standardized when you're in the realm of SEIS and EIS. Now, when you outgrow SEIS and EIS and potentially take VC or corporate or foreign investment, the game changes and you'll probably need a lawyer to support you. But at an early stage, the paperwork is so ridiculously standardized. I thought I would create a platform that does that. So we do 4 things. Firstly, on our website, we offer a whole bunch of free stuff, things like employment contracts, advisor agreements, term sheets, cap table modeling tools. It's a whole bunch of free stuff that founders typically need at an early stage and can't afford to pay for. So we do that. Secondly, we help companies get SEIS, EIS, advance assurance. I haven't really introduced what either SEIS, EIS is or what advance assurance. That'll all become clear in a minute, but we do that. We do it for free when people commit to a funding round, and we've got a ridiculously good track record there. Thirdly, we produce all of the legal documentation you need to close a funding round. I've got a slide on what this covers later, but it's literally every single document from term sheet and NDA at the front end to issuing share certificates at the back end and helping you with the compliance process after that. And then finally, we make introductions in an FCA friendly way between our customers and potential sources of funding, which is a mixture of private equity club and angel networks, of which there are about 130 in the UK, SEIS fund, crowdfunders, and so on. Anyway, that's enough about us. Let's talk about what you are here to listen to. So in terms of funding options in the UK, broadly, these are we've split them into three categories. You've got debt solutions, you've got some weird and wonderfuls in the middle that we'll cover, and then you've got equity-based solutions, and we'll cover that on the next slide. Now, as a founder, when I started a business, I thought, great, well, I don't really want to sell any equity to anybody else. I'd like 100% of that on the exit. So I'll take on some debt and repay that from profits in the future. That sounds like a really, really good idea, but actually, when you start digging into the debt options, lots of those aren't appropriate for businesses in the UK, certainly at an early stage. So if we just pick a couple of these at random, asset-backed lending sounds great. You've got an asset, you borrow against it, everybody's happy. That's great, but early stage startups don't typically have any assets to borrow against you. It's not as if you've got a printing press worth £1 million when you're a startup. You've got some IP, which you typically can't borrow against, and that's pretty much it. So asset-backed lending's out the window. Invoice factoring sounds great, doesn't it? You invoice a customer and you get money earlier than when the invoice is due via a factoring company, but that doesn't usually work either, because early stage startups probably have a year or two to go before they can raise any invoices. So then you fall back to bank debt and bank overdrafts. I tried that when I was a founder, and the first thing you get from most banks is something called a personal guarantee form, which is effectively saying that if the business disappears and can't repay the debt for any reason, then the debt transfers to each of the founders or directors in the business, which basically means you would be risking bankruptcy, and you're risking your own personal home if the business can't pay the debt, which to me sounded pretty unfair. So lots of people kind of walk through each of these options and realize that debt isn't always a great option. You then come on to the stuff in the middle. So we've got grants here. Grants are absolutely amazing. It's effectively free money that never needs to be repaid. The problem at the moment, I mean, when I started investing 6 or 7 years ago, grants were much less contended. So, you had a 1 in 5, maybe a 1 in 10 chance of winning a grant. Now there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of applications for every grant, which means that you need to put your best foot forward when you're applying for the grant, which means you need to pay for somebody to help you with the grant because everybody else is. So it's expensive to apply for grants. And also, it's kind of a 1 in 20 success ratio, depending on the grant. So people, you should absolutely still apply for those grants, but it's much less certain than it used to be. You've then got things like reward-based crowdfunding, which is great. If you're producing a physical B2C direct-to-consumer type product, then actually you can do a Kickstarter campaign to get people pledging for your future products. They pay money up front and then you deliver them the product afterwards. And that's a really lovely way of starting a business and not diluting your equity share. But for lots of SaaS type businesses, that just won't work. You've then got something called a convertible loan note, and there are other instruments like safe note options and warrants as well. Sometimes they're equity, sometimes they're debt, which is why they're between the two. In the UK, you very, very, very rarely see those instruments because they're not compatible with SEIS and EIS. So your only options in the UK when fundraising are using something called an advanced subscription agreement, doing what's called a normal price round, or using agile investment. And those are all equity-based solutions. That's what SEIS and EIS is. So let's dig into for a second what those equity options are in the UK. So first, let me say about this diagram, it's not meant to be a linear journey from bootstrap, friends and family, angels, Virtually no business will walk around this journey step by step. In virtually all cases, you'll skip and jump and you'll stop earlier than at the end. So lots of businesses, they'll bootstrap for a little while, they'll do a couple of angel rounds, and then they'll do a VC round, for example. Or they'll do a family and friends round, maybe go on to crowdfunding, and then they'll stop. So nobody virtually jumps on every single step here. Something really interesting, or a few really interesting things happen as you go around the journey. So firstly, the amount you can raise typically jumps as you go around the journey. So family and friends, you may get £50,000 if you're lucky from mum and dad and some friends. From angels, the average pre-seed, pre-revenue round in the UK is about 250k at the moment. Angel networks can pledge, I've seen, rounds of $750,000. Crowdfunding can be well into the millions. And VCs, typically there are, SoftBank put billions into some companies. So the amount you can raise increases as you go around this journey, typically. But also your valuation does. So if you do a family and friends round, your valuation will probably be less than $1 million, 600,000 or whatever is about average, I think. If you're doing a normal angel round, then the average valuation pre-seed, pre-revenue, according to Bohurst, is about 1.4, 1.5 million. And then again, if a VC's putting a couple of £1 billion into your business, the valuation is going to be much, much more there. It's going to be tens, if not hundreds of billions, maybe. So yeah, the valuation increases as you go around. The final thing that happens is that the sophistication of the investors will increase as well. So the terms that you get from your investors will typically be more investor friendly the further you go around this journey. So if mum and dad are putting £20,000 in or whatever, you may not have any paperwork. You might just file an SHO1, give them a share certificate, and everybody's happy. Angels are going to be much less trusting than mum and dad, and therefore they'll probably want a shareholders agreement and articles and a bunch of other rights and protections in those documentation. And then when you get around to VCs, the glove really comes off. This is, their job is making investments, and they have really strong investor-friendly terms. And it's worth bearing in mind that investment terms are a zero-sum game. So when something's investor-friendly, it means it's founder-unfriendly, and vice versa. So when investors take a specific right or protection, it means that it's tying your hands or it's disadvantaging you as a founder in some ways. Now, there is a sweet spot from friends and family with some caveats around SEIS funds where your investors will be look to make use of the SEIS and EIS schemes for reasons we'll come on to in just one slide. And what that does, it removes a whole bunch of very investor-friendly terms. So there are terms like anti-dilution and non-diluting shares and liquidation preferences. You may not know what they are, but they're all very investor-friendly terms that strategic investors and VCs love. Those terms just aren't compatible with SEIS and EIS. So when you're in the sweet spot between friends and family and SEIS funds, the terms you get cannot include those terms because they're just not compatible with SEIS and EIS. So as an angel investor myself, I've got the choice of having very, very investor-friendly terms and using liquidation preferences or whatever, or making use of the amazing tax breaks from SEIS and EIS. And I always choose tax breaks. And therefore, that means that the terms you get under the SEIS and EIS scheme should be much more founder-friendly than later stage rounds. So that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of equity options. Let's take a look. I've mentioned SEIS and EIS a lot. So let's have a look at what those schemes entail.
Do you want me to, I was just going to say, do you want to go back to that slide and I can just quickly, I was just going to say from my perspective. So 2 of my businesses we bootstrapped. Those are the successful ones. Never took any money from friends and family. I did take some money from an angel, and that business ended up not going to plan. So we ended up having to give it back to him. He was actually a friend of mine, so I wanted to give it back to him. And we also had, for another business, 200 grand off Dragon's Den from Theo Pavitas. So I suppose you'd call that an angel. Yep. And that business actually failed as well. So I'm not saying that angel-backed businesses or VC-backed businesses fail. I'm just saying that the 2 that I had didn't go to plan, and actually I bootstrapped, but that's because I was running service-based businesses where we were actually able to get our clients to prepay us. So it was kind of like customer funded. And then I was just going to say, so for me, I would never invest in friends or family personally, just because I don't want to have that awkward situation. But I am an angel, and I've done 35 or 30 very small micro angel investments. And I'm also part of a few angel networks. I love being part of an angel network. And I think from an angel perspective, being part of an angel network means that you're not having to do all that sort of due diligence and work on your own, and you've got the sort of support of these amazing people who might be domain experts who are like looking through the deck. And actually, for someone like me who's super busy, I haven't got time, and I don't know like what a good business in that area looks like, because I'm new to angel investing, and that's why the networks are so great. So if you can get into an angel network where you've got someone flying the flag for you, I've actually just managed to get one of our founders into a network, and I think, you know, I only invested 2K because I've run out of money, and I kind of had to do it because I'd introduced her, but I think she ended up getting, you know, 10, 15 times that. And more importantly, she's got 10 amazing like operators and exit founders on her cap table. So that's maybe where the angel networks are really good. Anyway, back to you, Sam.
No, I fully agree. And we don't cover it in this deck, but I'll cover it now just because I think it's interesting. For me, if I was a founder looking for funding, I would absolutely go to the angel networks first, because, you know, trying to chase individual angels on LinkedIn and trying to, you know, find them, putting stuff on, you know, UKBA, Dealshare, etc. You know, those one-to-one conversations just take a huge amount of time. And fundraising is a distraction from running your business, right? So yeah, trying to reach out to individual angels is genuinely painful. And an angel network is a group of 30 to 100 angels who invest together. And actually, that is a really great way of pitching once, having, you know, potentially 100 people listening to your pitch. And out of that, you only probably need 10 people to invest, and you've closed your funding round. Now, there is a downside, of course. There's a couple of downsides, actually. Firstly, the terms are going to be more stringent than individual angels, probably, because they've got bargaining power. They understand what good looks like. So they may ask for a board observer. They'll probably want investor consent and information rights, but nothing ridiculously unreasonable. And secondly, you generally have to pay a fee to the group that kind of brings the angels together. And normally that's between
neither of mine do. Neither of mine. We don't charge founders anything.
Amazing. Well, those groups I need to promote even more then, but most groups are 5 to 8%.
Wow.
Yeah, that is the normal in the industry. But even at that level, you know, you're trading off time versus cost, and I think it would be worth losing 5% of your investment in order to get the funding in earlier. But yeah, offline we must talk about those two groups, and I should be promoting.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really interesting. I think all of these things are super interesting for founders to understand how angels work and how angel networks work. I mean, I literally get inundated by decks. I'm only giving people $2,000 maximum. It's like, it's really not worth it to come to me directly. You would actually be better to go to angel networks where you've got lots of people all coming together. I think the other thing about angels is they don't say if they're actively investing. They often don't say what their thesis is. They often don't say all these things. So you might have heard that they invested in someone else, but that could have been because, you know, they had a personal relationship with that person. They used to work with them or something like that, I'd say. And also with angels versus angel network is probably, as you said, getting more towards the VC end. So one of my angel networks, I'll only invest if you're a tech business with 100, you know, a chance to do 100x.
Yeah.
Whereas angels, I'm just investing in the business because I think the founder's amazing, and I'd be happy if they do 3, 4, you know, 5, 10 times. I'm not expecting 100x. But anyway, I don't want to delay you because I know we've got a lot to cover off, and we've got many things to talk about.
So, well, it's taken us 20 minutes to get to this point, but let me tell you all about SEIS and EIS. So I haven't even told you what the schemes are. SEIS is Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, and EIS is just Enterprise Investment Scheme. The two schemes are very related. They were introduced in the same legislation. There are lots of identical areas between the two schemes. So, you know, qualifying trades is exactly the same. The same types of businesses are eligible under both schemes. But there are some real nuances. There are some real corner cases where the schemes are slightly different. The most obvious being the amount you can raise. So what we'll do is a case study on SEIS to start, and then we'll move on to EIS in a moment. So SEIS, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, that allows you to raise up to £250,000 minus any de minimis state aid you've already received, which is a really important point. And you can raise that within the first 3 years of trading. Now, there's a slight nuance between SEIS and EIS. The EIS 7-year date starts from the date of your first sale. SEIS, the clock starts ticking from the date you start to trade, which is a real nuance and something to be to keep aware of. Imagine I put £10,000 into a business under the SEIS scheme, then the government gives me back almost instantly £5,000. So once a bunch of paperwork's been done, I get something called an SEIS 3 form that allows me to claim back £5,000 almost instantly, which is brilliant. Imagine the business does really well. So imagine the business does 100 times. So you turn as a founder my £10,000 into £1 million, then there's not a penny of capital gains tax to pay on that increase in value from 10,000 to £1 million, which is genuinely amazing. I think in every other walk of life in the UK, there's CGT to pay on any kind of increase like that, other than your own personal home. So it's that tax break alone is amazing. But there's also loss relief. So if the business fails for whatever reason, and lots of startups do fail for various reasons, then the government will give you back roughly another 22%, depending on your prevailing tax position. So actually, when you invest £10,000, you're risking £2,800 out of that investment, which is genuinely amazing. There's another benefit that isn't talked about much. It isn't the most cheery topic ever, but there's inheritance tax relief as well. So if I invest in your business, hold the shares for at least 2 years and then die, then the shares pass to my estate outside of that inheritance tax calculation. So really useful for that kind of wealth planning. So that's SEIS. Like I say, under SEIS, you can only raise up to 250, and it only lasts for 3 years from the date you start to trade. But it's a really lovely incentive scheme for those really early stage, pre-seed, pre-revenue type rounds. If you need to raise more than 250, then you can do something called a dual round, where you combine both SEIS and EIS into the same funding round. You see first funding rounds of, say, £500,000. That will be 250 under SEIS and another 250 under EIS. A word of warning about that: you need to be really paranoid about how you run those funding rounds. You're not allowed to take both SEIS and EIS cash on the same day. Otherwise, you absolutely destroy that SEIS relief and everybody falls to EIS, and you would have some really disappointed investors. So if you're ever raising both SEIS and EIS in the same round, then you really need to take care of the mechanics of doing that. Let's move on to the enterprise investment scheme. Now, again, I'll use the same case study. I put £10,000 into your business under EIS. The government gives me back £3,000 again, almost instantly. So once the paperwork's done, I can then claim £3,000 in upfront tax relief, which is amazing. It's not as good as SEIS, but it's still pretty good. The capital gains tax and inheritance tax exemptions are the same, and the loss relief is proportionally less as well. So I'm risking 61%. I'm risking 38% roughly of my investment under the EIS scheme, again, depending on my prevailing tax condition. Now, the benefit of the EIS scheme is it seems like a worse scheme because the incentives are less for investors, but you can raise much, much more. You can raise tens of millions, 5 million a year over 7 years from the date of your first sale. And actually, all you need to do is raise your first pound of EIS, and then it kind of lasts forever. There's another sub-scheme that may be appropriate for some people on this call. There's a sub-scheme called Knowledge Intensive Company, and that allows you to raise much more over a longer period and much more per year. In order to benefit from KIC, you need to have a good proportion of your employees with either masters or PhD who are actively using those qualifications in R&D in your business. So it's a bit of a corner case, but for deep tech, it's an interesting way of extending past the existing EIS limits. So that's what I wanted to say about the schemes. Emmy, I don't know if you've got any questions on or any thoughts on that.
I did have one, and I just totally forgotten what it was. I was just going to say, so are there some rules around the loss relief? Like, do you have to hold the shares for a certain amount of time? Because actually, I've had 2 of my founders who haven't survived a year. So, is there rules around that?
So in order to benefit from most of the tax reliefs here, you need to hold the shares for at least 3 years. And I had an example. I invested in a games company, and they tried exiting after 2 years and 10 months, which would have destroyed. I'd have had to pay back the 50% of cash I received, and I'd have paid CGT on the exit. Now, thankfully, the transaction stalled and it delayed past the 3rd year anniversary, and I kept all of my tax relief. Now, in terms of the loss relief, the company doesn't have to survive for a specific period. So you don't have to have held the shares for at least 3 years, as with all of the other tax relief. It kicks in immediately as soon as you get an EIS, as soon as you've claimed the tax relief, once you get an SEIS or EIS 3 form. There is a window of danger there, and the window of danger is enhanced by an ASA, which I'll come on to in a minute. But the window of danger is the company collapses before you get your SEIS 3 or EIS 3 certificate.
That's what's happened to me.
Yeah, and therefore you can't claim under the schemes. And the reason why I say an advanced subscription agreement increases the investor risk, because the ASA typically has a 6-month long stop date. So you've got 6 months to wait before you actually own equity into the company. And then the SEIS 3 or EIS, the compliance process starts. So it kind of extends that duration by which, you're at risk of not being able to claim under the loss relief. So Emmy has run off, I suspect, to the shed people. Philip, I don't know if you had any views on the loss relief and the risks associated with that.
Try and unmute myself. Thank you. Yes, so loss relief is available. There's no minimum holding period in order to get loss relief for shares in SEIS or EIS. Obviously, if the shares are disposed of within the 3-year period, whether that's because the company's dissolved or because they're sold out at a loss, and then there is a clawback of the relief to the extent that you get proceeds usually. But loss relief is still available even if you haven't held your shares for at least 3 years.
Yeah, but the critical part is, as an investor, you've got to make sure you get those SEIS 3, the SEIS 3 form, because otherwise,
you can't claim the income tax relief without getting the SEIS 3 or EIS 3 certificate from the company. Doesn't mean you can't get loss relief, because actually there's a general loss relief as well for shares that could have qualified for SEIS and EIS, but there are limits on the amount of loss relief that you can claim in that respect.
Amazing. So I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's something that's really important for founders who are on the call, is it's really critical for investors that you've got all of that set up and that it's all ready to go and you've got your advance assurance, because if you don't have that, it's like a massive risk to investors, isn't it? So I think, Sam, that's definitely something that's important for founders to consider. Like, as soon as you think you're going to be raising, you need to get that assurance that you're going to have, that you're going to be able to give your investors their SEIS and EIS certificates. Anyway, let's continue. I know we've got a lot to do.
Your point is a lovely segue to the next slide, which talks about advance assurance, and that is a concept I have spoken about, but we've not properly introduced. So, what is advance assurance? So, advance assurance, it sounds grand, doesn't it? Actually, it's just an email from HMRC confirming that any investment in the company should benefit from either the SEIS or the EIS scheme. So it gives your investors that, it's not 100% certainty, but it gives them the comfort that they should benefit from those tax reliefs. As an angel investor myself, when anybody approaches me, I get inundated, probably the same as you, Emmy, with dozens of approaches per day.
I was just going to say, you need to move on to the next slide. I think you're still on the...
I was just doing the intro. That's okay. Here we go.
Oh, sorry. No, someone was saying, can you move on to the next slide? And I was thinking, mate, I quite often do that where I'm on the wrong side. Anyway, carry on. No,
that was the intentional, but here we go. You can see the next slide anyway. Advance assurance is certainty that, or comfort that the investor will benefit from the tax relief. There's no certainty with HMRC, I'm afraid. And when somebody approaches me on LinkedIn, I ask for 4 things: pitch deck, forecast, advance assurance, and term sheet. Those are the kind of basics. That's table stakes for me. If you haven't got any of those, then you're just looking ill prepared for a funding round, and it's not really a great look. So advance assurance, like I say, you build a submission, or we can do that on your behalf, build a submission to HMRC with a bunch of information, and we'll walk through what needs to go to HMRC. You click send, and then you wait, and HMRC reply with an email. Sometimes we'll cover the kind of corner cases of the process on the next slide. But yeah, hopefully you get an email back confirming your advance assurance. Now, in terms of timescales for this, you can build, as long as you've got a decent pitch deck and forecast ready to go, we can build a submission for this same day. It doesn't take that long. In terms of the response time from HMRC, the best we've ever had, and we've had this probably a couple of dozen times now, we've had next business day. So you click a submit button on the SEIS Advance Assurance portal, and then next business day, HMRC write back with a thumbs up, and that's brilliant. The average time at the moment is about 10 working days, 2 weeks, maybe a little, they seem to be a little swifter running up to Christmas, which seems mad. And sometimes, in the middle of the summer holiday, it can take a month on average. It's very seasonal depending on HMRC. So how do you build a submission? What does an advance assurance submission encompass? So the first thing you need to do before you can even think about this, you need to incorporate, which means you've picked a name, probably got a registered office somewhere, you're formally incorporated, and you've got a company bank account. Those are all kind of the prerequisites. Crucially, and I can't believe it's not on this slide, you also need your corporation tax, your UTR from HMRC. You can't make an advance assurance application until you've got that. A UTR is usually sent out within 2 weeks of you incorporating by HMRC, but it's kind of adding on to the critical path. You can't incorporate on one day and then apply for advance assurance because you won't have your UTR, so you need to wait for that. You need a couple of key documents to submit to HMRC. The two key documents that always take a long time are the pitch deck and the forecast. The pitch deck needs, you can technically do an advance assurance application using a business plan, but we urge against that because actually it's really, really, really painful. And if you submit an 80-page document to HMRC, they're going to read every single page of it, every single word, and you give them lots of opportunities to ask lots of questions. So our very strong preference is just submitting a pitch deck and a forecast. And yeah, there's less surface area for HMRC to raise queries on. The pitch deck needs to bring to life certain things like, capital at risk, genuine growth company, sources of revenue, use of funds, how are you going to spend the money? But we've got our service includes a check of your pitch deck and forecast to make sure you tick all of the boxes for HMRC. The forecast model can be very, very, very simplistic. We see everything from the sublime to the ridiculous with forecast model. The ridiculous being, 30 tabs in an Excel model with VAT timing and corp tax timing and, a very, very complicated formula. HMRC don't need to see that. You need a very straightforward, revenue, cost of sale, overheads, rolling cash flow, and then really what you're trying to demonstrate there is that you need the investment so you can justify the investment, i.e. you delete the investment out of the spreadsheet and you're making a loss, which is roughly proportional to the amount you're seeking investment for. The forecast model needs to be at least 3 years, and it doesn't need to be monthly, actually. HMRC will accept annual forecast models. On our free stuff on our website, we've got an example, a minimum viable forecast model, which is embarrassingly simplistic, actually. But the reason I love it, it's never once been queried by HMRC. So in all of the submissions we've done, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, we've never once had a query on that forecast model, which is amazing. You also need to submit a few of these additional documents that you may or may not have. So you need to submit a copy of your proposed shareholder agreement or investment agreement or whatever investment instrument you're going to be using, and your articles of association, your proposed articles of association. It's unusual here because sometimes if you don't submit these, HMRC actually won't ask for them. But yeah, lots of times if you don't submit them, then they'll say, right, we need to understand the instruments the investors are going to use, and then you need to scrabble around and find them. So we always include them with the submission because it just stops that kind of query cycle or cuts down on the query cycle. You need to include details of your de minimis state aid. So if you've had an Innovate grant for 50,000 that's classed as de minimis state aid, you need to submit that to HMRC as well. And the reason they will expect to see that is normally, depending on the timings, that SEIS is classed as de minimis state aid itself, and you're only allowed 250,000 in total in de minimis state aid over a certain period. So if you've already had £50,000, depending on timing, that will come off your £250,000 SEIS allowance. We then come to the question that I always get from founders, which is the chicken and egg problem, which is, right, I need to submit the name of at least one investor to HMRC as part of my SEIS advance assurance application, but none of my investors will talk to me unless I can prove I've got advance assurance, which is kind of a chicken and egg. How do you solve that? On the bright side, it is a ridiculously low barrier to pass. You need to name somebody who, in principle, could invest in your business. They can't be a family member broadly. They shouldn't be an employee, and they should be a UK taxpayer. So you need to provide the name and address and a potential investment amount for that person. But that person doesn't end up having to invest. So it could be your best friend, it could be Emmy, maybe, it could be anybody you know who's willing.
I was just going to say, do people just like put random people on there?
It
That
needs
they
to
haven't
be a real,
even asked. That they haven't asked.
you probably should ask.
This is a really odd one because we've asked the revenue what they do with that information because some people are nervous about having their names on it. The revenue won't tell us what they do. And sometimes the revenue will say, well, if you only name one person, how much are they going to invest? It's got to be at least half the amount you're raising. Sometimes you get questions on that as well.
Yeah,
it's a slightly odd requirement. Yeah,
it is very odd. But this was introduced because a few years ago there were lots of foreign companies, thousands, literally speculatively throwing advance assurance applications into HMRC, and HMRC was having to work on all of them. Whereas actually they've introduced this investor requirement, and that has completely turned off that tap. So. We've never seen HMRC make a single inquiry of the investor provided. I suspect what they do is a look up in HMRC's own records to check it's a real person and they're a UK-based taxpayer. And if you've passed that barrier, then we've never once seen any inquiry made. As Philip said, it needs to be a substantial amount of the funding round. So if you're raising, £200,000 and you put your best friend down for £10, that is not going to cut the mustard. HMRC are absolutely going to raise a query on that. But there's no reason, and I'm not advising anybody to do this, but there's no reason you don't put your best friend down to invest £100,000, for example. So it's a very, very, very easy thing to hurdle to get over. Finally, and I won't labour this point, if you are doing an advance assurance application under knowledge intensive company, and we saw that on the last slide, or something called a condition B, which is, God, I'm letting one of my secrets out of the bag again early. We'll come on to that in a moment. But if you're doing either one of those applications, then usually we put an explanation paper with it explaining why you're a KIC or why you're a condition B. Anyway, I'm going to move on from this because I'm very conscious of time. So what does the process look like? So in short, you prepare a submission pack, and we can do that for you. You click submit, and then HMRC respond in some way. Now, the top route is it's granted straight away. That is by far the most common route. So we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, and probably 98% go straight through as granted. Sometimes you'll get a conditional granted, which means that, if you say, right, I'm raising 200 grand this month and I'm raising $1 million in a year, HMRC will say, well, we're going to grant the first advance assurance, but the $1 million you're going to have to reapply for later. It's not catastrophic, it just needs a bit more paperwork. But yeah, that is still a good outcome. It means you can do your short-term funding round. You then get, and I'll skip the rejected for a minute, you then get the queried and missing info where, quite often companies enter the wrong UTR, or there's a typo, or HMRC want to satisfy that you actually genuinely meet the conditions of the scheme, in which case, the problem is this is never just one query, it turns into a fishing expedition. So if you get a query, typically you'll get 10 questions on even though you might have answered all of those in your pitch deck and forecast, you get a whole bunch of questions, which is painful to reply. It's not catastrophic, and we've, probably 1% of the submissions we do get that query, and of those, we've only ever had one failure. So we've only ever had one company which has gone into the rejected bucket, and that is where HMRC on the face of it understand that your business is, for whatever reason, just not eligible under the scheme. And then you will get a rejection letter. The rejection letter is pretty blunt, and it makes it clear there's no right to appeal because advance assurance isn't a statutory process, and it is genuinely the end of the road. But thankfully, we've only ever seen that once. Now, the other thing I wanted to cover on this slide is what happens once you've taken on funding. So typically you'll get advance assurance, and then it may be 2-6 months or whatever until you take on investment. But when you do take on investment, you've then got some post-completion requirements. There's some things you need to do post-investment. So normally that would involve filing an SHO1 with Companies House to notify them of the share issue. You've probably got new articles of association that need filing within 2 weeks at Companies House again. And then you've got something, and this is a pretty horrible process, you've then got a process called SEIS compliance, where you as the founder have to fill in something called an SEIS1 submission. It's really, really painful, and it's painful because you have to do one submission per date of share issue, per scheme, per share class. So if you sprinkle your investors over like a 2-week period, or there are different share classes, or you've got SEIS and EIS, you end up having to do lots and lots and lots of SEIS submissions. You can only do that once you've spent either 70% of the money or the business has been trading for 4 months as well. The rules are slightly different for EIS, but those are the rules for SEIS. And quite often, as soon as your investors have put the money in, they'll be chasing you for their form that allows them to claim. But you've got to pass the hurdle of either spending 70% of the cash or trading for 4 months. When you do your submission, HMRC will review it. Sometimes they ask queries, but it's relatively rare at this point. HMRC will send you an SEIS2 form, which contains a number. You then put that onto an SEIS3 form that you issue to your investors. So that's a really painful multi-stage process. We've automated as much of that as we can on the FounderCatalyst platform, but it's still a little bit clunky. Once you've got the SEIS3 or EIS3 form as an investor, you then claim from HMRC. The most normal way of claiming is as part of your annual return, as part of your tax return at the end of the year. That's the way I always claim because it's straightforward and less painful. There is a way, so you can claim back from last year's tax relief. So you can go back a year when you're an offset against the previous year's tax. In that case, you have to post physically the SEIS3 or EIS3 form to HMRC, and typically they send you a check. I think that is probably a good place to stop and enter Q&A because I'm conscious we've only got 10 minutes left, Emmy.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how much of a rush you are on to go, and
I am
but
not.
yes, you're not in a rush.
No.
I think what has been, we haven't done the SEIS secrets. Have we got time to do those quickly?
Absolutely. Let me run through. So I've told you a couple of these anyway, but so one is around founders and the founding team making use of SEIS and EIS. Now, HMRC don't particularly encourage this, but there is a way, and it's been done quite a few times, where every founder in a business can get SEIS covering their subscriber shares. It's quite a brittle process and it's painful. It's much more painful than just incorporating, but it is possible for founders themselves to make use of SEIS as long as they are not preparing to trade yet. And HMRC call even creating a bank account preparing to trade. So you need to be really careful here. I'm sure virtually everybody on the call has already done something which starts that process, and therefore that won't be open. But there is another kind of sub-use case of SEIS, EIS, where if you've got advisors or NEDs or chair people, or even co-founders joining the business at a later date, you can use SEIS and EIS to incentivize those people to join the business. And under SEIS, at least, typically, I mean, I've done it with one of my companies. I incorporated with me as the only founder, and then I took my co-founders on using the SEIS scheme. So we took on investment, they became directors afterwards, and there's nothing preventing them from taking a normal salary and things like that. So it's a really lovely, elegant way of getting shares into the hands of people in a ridiculously tax efficient manner. Sorry.
Can you just explain that again? Because I know we've got loads to cover off, but I kind of understand this from both sides, but even that kind of slightly went over my head a bit. So what you're saying is future employees or advisors, because also, by the way, I've been an advisor, a marketing consultant to a company that we invested in, that we got SEIS or EIS on, and I know there's some like grey areas there. So can you just explain that again? Like, say for example, you take on a co-founder or someone, they can buy shares into your company, they can invest into your company. So you're basically saying you can come on board, but you have to invest. But if you invest, you get SEIS or EIS. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. So the first thing to capture there is you can't use these for employees. The person under SEIS, the person needs to be a statutory director. So if you want to incentivize employees, you would implement something like a ESOP or EMI option plan. So that is not a use case for SEIS, EIS at all. But imagine, and I've done this, imagine you incorporate a business yourself, you want to bring a co-founder on, and this is subject to share ownership percentages and things like that. So it's not entirely straightforward, but it's a well-trodden path. You can have your future co-founder investing, and it can be a minimal amount. It can be a couple of £1,000s, for example. It needs to be vaguely material, but it doesn't need to be £50,000. You can set a very, very low valuation, and that person can get whatever 28% of your shareholding for a couple of £1,000s. Now, why bother, you may ask? Well, the benefit there is all around the CGT exemption on an exit, really. Nobody's going to get excited about getting £1,000 back from a £2,000 investment. But in my case, I exited after 4 years, and we invested in our own business via these schemes, and that genuinely saved millions and millions for each of us in capital gains tax. So it's a really great use case for that. Sorry, did that make any sense, Amy?
It made more sense. I think if anyone's got a question on that, they might need to just contact you,
Very
directly.
happy to have a chat straight after
Yeah.
this with everybody on anything, really.
Amazing.
The next secret, and I'll rattle through these. So there is something called a condition B that I alluded to earlier, and we've used this to, one of our customers has a 20-year-old business. They incorporated in 2001. On the face of it, they're well out of the scope for SEIS and EIS, but there's something called condition B, where a business is entering either a new geographic area or a new area of business, that you're releasing a new product or entering a new geography, and you can do something called a condition B advance assurance application. And there are lots of hoops to jump through here again, but that allows very old businesses, even ones outside of that 7 and 10 years, to make use of that kind of make use of the EIS scheme. Lots of caveats with that use case, but it's a really great way, even if you have a slightly older business, for you to be able to still access that EIS scheme. Couple of others, another secret. So there is a blanket statement usually made that families can't invest under SEIS, EIS. That is technically not true. Now, parents and children, there is a problem usually with that. But actually your brother and sister, for whatever reason, are excluded from that, and ditto step parents. So your brother, sister and step parents can invest in your business via SEIS and EIS, and the usual caveats around family members don't apply to them. And then finally, last secret, foreign companies can make use of SEIS and EIS sometimes too. So they can cross-register with Companies House, which is basically registering a foreign entity into the UK. And as long as they have an agent established in the UK, sometimes they can make use of SEIS and EIS as well.
I was just going to say, I've just invested in a business with 2 German founders that are registered in the UK.
Well, that is no secret at all to you then, Amy. But
it's not a secret to me, but it was until because I was like, how can I invest in these people, because they're in Germany, but they actually set that business up. We've got loads of questions. Philip, you have done a brilliant job answering all the questions in the Q&A. I see that. So I think what we do is, if we come to these open questions, also some of the answered questions, if we've got time, we might go through those again, because rather than just giving a couple of words, which Philip's done a brilliant job of, to actually tell them yes or no or whatever, it might also be a topic of conversation. And I know we're going to create this piece of content is going to be amazing for people to watch for like a long time. So question for either of you: at which point is the best timing for investing in your own company through SEIS or EIS?
The best company, if you can get away with it and the ship hasn't sailed, is probably before you've incorporated. So subscriber shares, and Philip, I'm sure you've seen this one in the wild, but subscriber shares, it's hard to do. So investing in your own business under SEIS to start, but that is the optimal way of doing it. But HMRC don't like it particularly, and you have to jump through some hoops, but that's the optimal place to invest in your own business via SEIS for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of founders don't qualify because they've got to have less than 30% of the company, and that's the main reason why you don't. But if you've got enough friends to invest with you, then you can make sure you qualify. You need very specific advice about that. You can't do it as a sort of process. You need to look at your own circumstances.
Okay, amazing. Michelle's saying, based on this, is there a particular time of year? That's a really good question, Michelle, to focus on closing an angel round, because I feel like there's always a big excitement around, April or whenever the tax year is closing.
Yeah, there's real seasonality in the investment space. So tip number 1, don't try raising now. So December's a tragic month for raising. Ditto anywhere between July and August. There are lots of investors, lots of the angel clubs just switch off for the summer. And lots of investors are, on their yacht in Saint-Tropez or whatever and aren't investing. The optimal time is February to April, because February and March, you've got a bunch of people who are using the last of their end of year tax relief. So they may have some tax relief left that they want to offset using SEIS or EIS. And then April, you've got a bunch of investors who are, who get brand new tax relief as of April. So I think the golden window in the UK is that February to April. And it's by far our busiest time of the year. We see more rounds close in those 3 months than the rest of the year, frankly.
I do remember actually speaking to a founder, and like it was probably February and she was desperately looking for investment. And then the next time I saw her, which was like May, she was like, I just got like 150K from an SEIS fund, like, you know, whatever. And so it was that obviously was, she's a brilliant founder, but that was obviously one of the reasons that they were looking to, you know, deploy their capital at that time. So great question there. We've got another question, which is businesses incorporated, but it's dormant and they don't have a business account yet. How do they benefit from SEIS as a founder? I suppose it's also like another question around that is if you have incorporated your business, but it's dormant, does that still account for you being in that, you know, when is your business active from HMRC's perspective?
The two rules here are slightly different across SEIS and EIS. So SEIS is the date you start trading, is the key date, and EIS is the date of your first sale. And what does trading mean for the purpose of that statement? Well, HMRC have a really lovely, doesn't work for SaaS businesses quite so well, but they've got quite an elegant description of what trading means, or start of trading. So imagine I'm opening up a shop. I rent the premises, I'm not trading, I put the shelves in, I stack the shelves, I'm still not trading. As soon as I change the sign from closed to open, that is the date I start to trade, even if nobody comes into my shop for a year and nobody buys anything. So there's a real difference between SEIS and EIS in that respect. If you've already incorporated and you've got a dormant company, the chances are you won't be able to make use of the subscriber share SEIS. I think that ship has sailed. There's no reason, there's no reason you don't, you know, forget about that company and close it and reincorporate another company, jumping through the hoops that Philip alluded to earlier. And this is very much a case by case, but you can jump through the hoops on a brand new company if you're happy just to collapse the existing company. Even if you've got a company and you're trading, I mean, in my case, I've started another company, not FounderCatalyst. I took the bath and, you know, I've got normal shares. I've not got SEIS, EIS compatible shares, but my co-founders joined by an investment, a minimal investment into the company. Because each of those have, I've got 3 more co-founders, because we've got 25% actually each, those incoming investors or co-founders all have less than the 30% that Philip alluded to earlier. And actually the other 3 people have made use of SEIS in their investment. Poor old me, I haven't managed to do that. But
I can just add to that companies which are doing R&D work are treated as carrying on a trade for EIS purposes. You don't actually have to be making sales. You'll be okay for EIS.
Amazing. So I am aware that some people are going to have to go. So before we carry on, before people go, can I just do a very quick poll, which we like to do, about how useful was this? So let me just go back and then we can carry on. So just get some session feedback, because we always like to do some session feedback. So, okay. Can you see that? How likely would you be to recommend this session to another founder? And it doesn't look like it's showing. Oh, that is a bit of a disaster. So maybe Sam has got off lightly. Can anyone actually see? Is that, allow panelists to vote. There we go. Let's see if that works now. Can people actually vote to say whether they thought this was any good? Allow panelists to vote in case okay, so everyone's saying it was useful. It was extremely great session. I'm going to give you a 10 out of 10, Sam and Philip. I don't know if anyone else can give you a 10 out of 10, but I'm going to give you a 10 out of 10. 12 out of 10. That was amazing. So we are going to carry on with questions. I just actually wanted to, everyone's saying 10 out of 10. That's perfect. I suppose if there was a 3 out of 10, they're probably not going to say it, but literally everyone's saying 10 out of 10. This has been such an amazing webinar. I think there's a lot to unpack. I think also we're going to share the recording afterwards, because I think this is something that people are going to need to review and watch quite a few times. Oh, hi, Becca. That was Becca, Bruntwood SciTech. Okay, cool. I was up seeing them in Leeds last week. It's so nice to see all these people that I've been visiting in person. So yeah, we're going to carry on with the questions. We're going to get through as many as we can. I've got another sort of 20 minutes, and I don't know about you and Sam and Philip if you need to run off, but just to say thank you to everyone for coming. It's been amazing to have you, and I think we're going to crack on with some more questions, but we will send a recording through. We're going to try and answer all these questions live, which means that if you don't stay for this bit, you'll be able to watch back all the questions as well. So
I've got a couple of things just to add in the things that have already been said.
yes, I was going to say, do you want to go over a couple of
there
things
was-
that have been answered?
There was
Philip?
there was a comment about knowledge-intensive companies and needing a skilled workforce. You don't actually need that. It's okay if you're creating intellectual property and the majority of your business in the future is depending on that intellectual property. You don't need to have people with master's degrees necessarily.
What can you just give a bit more? What do you mean by intellectual property?
So so like software is copyright, or you've got something that's patented or something like that. Most sort of software businesses will be creating intellectual property, so you don't necessarily need what's called a skilled workforce, people with master's degrees, in order to qualify as a knowledge intensive company.
Okay, amazing. I think if we go back to these open questions and then we can review some of the answered ones. So can SEIS be used for different businesses? So take profits made from one startup exit into another business I have and invest it in that. So essentially you exit your business, you make, I don't know, let's say 500 grand, and then you put that into the new business that you've got.
Yeah, you can. It's got to be obviously a different business. If it looks like a phoenix, you won't qualify. But if it's
what's a phoenix, Philip? Tell us what a phoenix is.
Phoenix is where you've got one business, it sort of dissolves and sort of effect is resurrected the same business in another company. That won't qualify. But if it's a new business, which is obviously distinct and with its own substance and different from the one that you previously invested in, then you should be able to take your profits out of one and invest into the next.
Would you do that as a founder? So you take the profits out of business one that you've sold into yourself as a founder, and then rather than paying tax on that, you invest that into your new business. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, founders are difficult to qualify unless you can meet the 30% rule. But yes, if you
right,
can,
okay,
then you can roll. Yes.
Okay, good point. Okay, so that's a good. There's quite a lot of complications around being a founder.
All these rules are like those little number puzzles that you've got to try and get everything in the right order. And if you move something, you usually create a hole behind it, and you've got to fill that hole. So it's very complex. It's finding out.
Just to add, sorry, I mean there is CGT reinvestment relief as well, which is we could have an hour just on that. But there are ways, if you've had a big capital event, then usually SEIS is used as an income tax offset, but you can have CGT offsets as well. But that is a dark art that Philip will probably be able to opine on much better than me.
I've just had that. When I sold my house, I paid 10 grand in capital gains tax, my second home, and I've just had 10 grand rebate. So thank you very much, HMRC.
There we are.
For all the investments I did last year. So I think, for some investors, it can be really tax efficient. And I think for the purpose of this, it's really about understanding how SEIS and EIS benefit investors, and therefore how important it is to make sure your investors are aware of it and make sure that you're ready, and also to understand how it can benefit the business as a founder and what you need to get set up for. So someone's saying, is there a database of SEIS investors? I think so. The EISA platform have a database of their members. There are SEIS funds. I suppose lots of people are potential SEIS investors, aren't there? Like, I'm a potential SEIS investor. Anyone could be a potential SEIS investor. So I don't know so much if there's necessarily a list of the individual investors, but a lot of the angel collectives, and there are some SEIS funds. Have I answered that correctly, gentlemen? Yeah. Okay. Can we share the link with others when you release it? I'm not sure what we're talking about there. Are there any considerations to take into account if I have an established limited company for consulting purposes and I'm now raising SES for new startup company?
As long as they're two distinct companies, and as long as there isn't a continuation of trade between the two, that's fine. One of the mistakes we see alarmingly often is a business will start out, they're producing a SaaS platform that will be selling in a couple of years, but they do 1 or 2 days consultancy at the start to pay the bills. For the purpose of HMRC deem that you are starting, you're starting to trade there, and that starts the 2-year, the 3-year clock ticking, which is, we've seen that happen a number of times, and HMRC will decline SEIS and then you move on to EIS. So you've got to be really careful that you don't pollute your SEIS vehicle by doing any consulting or taking early revenue in any other way.
Brilliant.
Yes, SEIS relief is only available for the first trade, or the first business that company carries on. So if you do a consultancy in that business first, in that company first of all, that's the first trade. If you then want to change the trade, you won't get SEIS for the second trade. But
How would they know that? I mean, surely it's just all the same thing. I mean,
No,
how?
well, you've got to prove it's the same trade, and if the revenue decide it's not the same trade, you won't get SEIS for the second business.
So you would say consultancy is different to the consultancy that I'm doing, you know, because actually we've got founders in our community that are supporting their, you know, their startup with some consultancy on the side. So as long as the startup comes first and they're doing that.
If the consultancy is in the same line of business, then you'd argue it's the same trade. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
But
I mean,
but just be aware, it's, you know, if the revenue think it's different, then you won't get SEIS relief to fund the second business.
right.
The clock starts ticking when you sell anything, whether it's consultancy or your product. So we've seen people who go over the 3-year limit because they do some consultancy on day one. 4 years later, they're ready to release their product and they can't make use of SEIS because the consultancy started the clock ticking, if that makes sense.
So then you've either got to think about and I was going to ask that question actually. What happens? Can you just set up a new business? Can you just be like, oh, I didn't get SES, I'm just going to set up a new business? Or are you saying if it's a Phoenix, like you just the same thing with a different name, you can't do that?
Yeah, that's frowned upon. So that's continuation of trade. The HMRC, even if it was in a different business, even if it wasn't in a business. So if you were a sole trader doing something, if you started a business and then, you know, if HMRC can follow the breadcrumbs, then they will link those two businesses.
Okay.
And
if you transfer anything between the two, then you pick up the age of the predecessor.
Interesting. So you can't be like, oh, okay, well, I'll take the brand from that, or I'll take some team from that.
Yeah, there are some caveats. Most of this is EU state aid restrictions that we're still under, unfortunately.
Okay, so
there are some, just to pick up on that, there are some caveats to that transfer. So some of the businesses we've worked with, there's an engineering firm that builds a widget. They've transferred the IP of that widget into a new startup and declared all of this to HMRC. And as long as it's called foundational IP, that's the word HMRC uses, as long as it's foundational IP that's never been monetized in any way, then you can get away with that. We've seen that under SEIS businesses, but yeah, that's a bit of a minefield.
So Amy's asking, if SEIS starts at the first day of trading, if you're already trading, when does it start? So
The day you started trading originally.
So you've got to go back, Amy, to when you very first started trading. So even if you get your SEIS today, if you started trading 5 years ago, that's when they say it started. So then it wouldn't be relevant, would it? Because it would be over 3 years. Eric is saying, do investors have to be based in the UK to be the lead investor for SEIS?
The investors you list must be able to make use of SEIS scheme. So, you know, having a foreign investor in Germany who doesn't pay UK tax, they'd be a really bad investor to list because they can't in principle use the scheme.
Sorry, I missed one here. If you are currently registered as an LLP but plan to flip to a limited company soon, does this count as a new incorporation for the purpose of having founders' investment under SEIS if they have less than 30% equity?
No, you have to bring in the age of the LLP. So how old that is. So the new limited company will pick up the age of the LLP and be treated as though it's that age.
Because it's almost like you're just carrying on doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. If I invested in an early crowdfund round with company A and got SEIS in the second round, will I not be eligible?
I don't understand.
This is from an investor. So she's invested in a crowdfunding round with company A and she got her SEIS benefit.
Yeah.
In the second round, would she get her benefit again? Only if she invested again.
Yeah, potentially if the company still qualifies and it hasn't used up the limits, and yes, there's more relief for follow on. An EIS point though, that if you've got shares in a company already that's not SEIS or EIS shares, then you can't get any EIS relief for a further investment in that company.
Amazing. And one last one maybe, because I feel like we've done a lot. If I bootstrap my new product and paid for materials but have not yet incorporated, can I say that the money I've paid already is my investment as SEIS?
No, SEIS and EIS you only get tax relief if you invest cash for shares. It's got to be, the investment's got to be wholly in cash. It can't be for kind. And also, if the company repays a debt to you, you probably won't get relief.
Okay, that's good to know. I think we've answered a lot of these questions. There are a lot here. We're going to share the thing. Everybody, we've done that one. I think we pretty much, this might be a tricky one. Hi all, thanks a lot for the valuable info sessions. We've raised 200k with ASA 20 months ago. We'll issue the shares in April. Before that, we would like to get SEIS and raise 250k and combined ASA investors and SEIS investors in the same round. Is that possible? I do only have 2 UK taxpayer investors in the ASA round. I'm afraid they won't be eligible as it being more than 12 months.
It's more than 6 months. The ASA, the long stop date on an ASA must be a maximum of 6 months. So
that's not quite true. I mean, there's nothing in the law about it, but the revenue's policy is that you don't get EIS relief if it's more than 6 months after you advance the money before the shares are issued.
Yeah,
okay,
that's their guidance. Yeah, you're right. There's nothing in the law, is there?
I have argued a longer period, but you'll be stretching it if you're talking about sort of 20, 24 months. I think
But to answer the question, Emmy, in principle, you can have non-SEIS investors, and then you can take on SEIS. What you need there's a gross asset test, so you need to make sure your previous non-SEIS investment doesn't take you above the gross asset test. But subject to that should be fine.
amazing.